Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Friday.
There we go. Happy Friday, everyone. So lovely to see so many people online and so early in the morning. Also old, lovely. What a joy. Beautiful, beautiful morning. I was just thinking to myself as I was sitting here, the subject we're speaking about, imposter syndrome, it's a bit hard to not feel like a bit of one when you don't have enough caffeine in your system. Yeah. Brenton and myself, we both facilitators, and we're very accustomed to starting our sessions at 8:30, and we were kind of lining up for that this morning, and then we kind of had to message each other and go, oh yes, it's 8:15. So
Actually, 8:50. Yes.
yeah. So we like to try to do these things a little bit earlier in the morning because we have to catch people before their days start. So a bit of a power up boost on a Friday morning, and we hope we catch the timing just right so that you can start your day with something positive to get started. And yeah, we will begin officially in 1 minute, and it's just lovely to see everyone. Um, yeah, and I hope everyone's keeping
Brent,
nice and warm.
you talk about caffeine. I'm almost 4 months no caffeine as part of an overall detox. No alcohol, no caffeine, no stimulants of any kind, and it's actually proving to be quite easy, easier than I thought, which is quite surprising. So my coffee drinking imposter is shouting at me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think coffee's a medicine. That's one thing I'm not willing to let go of in life. And what I find quite interesting, just on a side, is that they actually have found that coffee has a positive effect on the microbiome for women. Mm. And even decaf coffee, which I'm very happy about because I have to switch to decaf after my first cup. So there's some completely irrelevant and useless information not related to imposter syndrome, but we'll just share that on the side. And obviously, we are not allowed to give medical information. So, all right. So we have wonderful. The room is filling up. And I think that we can launch into our topic. So fantastic, lovely to see everybody here, and we may get some more people popping in. So just the format for today, we will be speaking for about 30 minutes, having a wonderful discussion, and then we will open up for Q&A. So a very, very warm welcome, everybody. It is so lovely to see everyone. And today we have a subject that we're going to be discussing that is very close to both of our hearts, namely imposter syndrome. And I'm very delighted to welcome a very special friend, colleague, and someone I've been working with for a very long time, a friend, a mentor, and a great support to myself, someone who I really, really respect and have really come to enjoy walking this journey with executive coach Brenton Nestler. And we go back a long way. We've done a lot of work together on the presentation clinic, but these days, Brenton is very busy with his own coaching business. So thank you so much for joining us today, Brenton. And this subject, imposter syndrome, has been a very I have found it's a very real lived experience for most of our clients. And I'll be honest, it has been one for myself as well. And I don't know about yourself, Brenton.
Oh, very much so. It's certainly something that I both live with often and grapple with personally. And at the same time, it's something I see regularly with the people that I support in coaching.
Yeah, and this is really a topic that's a passion project for us, and it's just really a pleasure to share this with us, to share this with you. So, Brenton, I was mentioning, the journey that we've walked together, and yeah, I've really loved working with you. You've been a great inspiration to me, and probably my strongest resource in terms of a peer and a mentor. And I think you were already on the path of working with neuroscience and entering the coaching space with that. And you definitely were fundamental in introducing me to that aspect of coaching. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do before we get started?
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's just so wonderful to be involved in a discussion like this today. So I'm passionate about helping people to develop, and of course myself. And so my career has wound its way through learning and development, where I was an L&D manager in a multinational corporate for many years, and then discovered coaching in the early 2000s. And it completely opened up the marriage of those two worlds, facilitating and training, but more importantly, facilitating conversations that help people to grow. And so now, for the last 10 years since leaving corporates, I love being an independent coach and facilitator, and I support leaders and business owners and high functioning people with working out who they want to be next and strategies to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brenton. So Brenton from Flying Manta. And I must say that I personally, I did not have a very positive opinion of coaches until I met Brenton, who actually inspired me to become one myself. So thank you for that, Brenton. But before we go deeper, because what we would really like to share with you is imposter syndrome. I think is a really good place to start is with the definition. Would you mind giving us your definition, Brenton?
Yeah, sure. So if we're really honest, like most people here, just like most people that are high achievers and are successful career builders, have probably at some point bumped into that experience of sitting in a meeting or being with a bunch of other people and quietly questioning inside themselves, ooh, do I really belong here? Or, it's only a matter of time before someone figures out that I don't, or that I'm not as good as I maybe am thought to be. And so this is a very real thing, and it's been with us for a very long time. And in the 1970s, some clinical psychologists in America were studying this phenomenon, and particularly they were looking at high functioning and high achieving women in the academic space. And these women, despite real success and being very, very good and very expert at their respective fields, kept showing up with saying how deep down they believed that they were intellectual frauds and that they were imposters and that they didn't belong. And so when they were pressed on this, they would say, "Oh no, my success is just down to luck or charm or just good lucky timing." In fact, pretty much anything that they could find to deflect away from their own competence. And so, the reality is that this is a very lived experience. And one of those researchers at the time went back later and said that the name syndrome that eventually came to be associated with it, she wished that she'd actually called it imposter experience rather, because it's not something that we are. We might believe that we are, but it's not something that we are. It's something that we go through. And so I guess the idea is to think of it really as a side effect of our own development and growth.
I really love that. And, I find labels very destructive. I just wanted to throw that in there. But I also think that, we can find meaning in things and it can help us make sense of the world, but just to not, be defined by something. But this is something that I have found huge resonance with and something I've observed extensively. So I would really like to concur with what you said. for me, imposter syndrome, what I've observed is that it happens when we fail to internalize our lived experience. We've got the evidence, we've got the track record, the results, but it doesn't land as proof, and we explain it away. So we attribute all the things that we're getting right, our journey, our life journey, to luck, to timing. So far we've just been lucky that at some point we're going to get found out that we're not really that good, and it is quite unfortunate based on what I've observed that it definitely seems to impact the high achievers and the women in business a lot. So before we look at how to identify it, Brenton, would you say that if someone suspects that they have imposter syndrome, that the irony is that they probably do?
Absolutely. I mean, if we just look at that as a situation, the fact that they're actually grappling with and asking that question means that somewhere inside of them, they're doubting and they're wondering and they're asking themselves like that at a deep fundamental level. So, as coaches, of course, when we come in across that as something that someone says, like, oh, I wonder if I might have imposter syndrome. Ideally, we would just bat it straight back to them and go, well, do you think you do? And if so, where's that coming from?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think maybe some of us think maybe it's better to have imposter syndrome than not, but I don't actually think that that's the case. But let's have a look at anyone who's wondering about that right now. What are the most common signs? So, you probably find that you really struggle to accept compliments. This is really a big deal. And I found that a lot in my life. If someone gives me a compliment, it's like, get rid of that thing. And you may find that you really are overworking and putting too much into things that maybe other people aren't, as a way of compensating for this fear of inadequacy. You may feel that you really have to earn your place, and it's just a matter of time until someone notices. So if any of this is landing, then I just want to say that you're in good company, that there's nothing wrong with you. And Brenton, how would you say that it impacts people on a day-to-day basis?
Well, there's so many ways, but if one researches this and dives deeper, the evidence seems to show that like as many as 70+% of people, particularly in their professional lives, suffer this kind of experience on a regular basis. So the good news is that it's actually not rare and unusual, and it's not unique to individuals. It's actually very, very common. And the other good news is that it's not a weakness. It's not a flaw. It's simply a limiting experience. And where this shows up most is in people who really push and stretch themselves in their careers and are wanting to do very big and purposeful and meaningful work and are wanting to look good as a result of that and are wanting to deliver big results. That's where this often shows up spectacularly. And so, where people end up suffering as a result of that is you've touched on a couple of really important points, and it shows up often in the coaching conversations I have, is like frantic over preparation. Like, I better make sure I've got all the information and more because I can't risk getting caught out not knowing. So huge amounts of time and effort and energy are invested in preparing and by extension, protecting. And then overcompensating at the same time as well shows up in a big way. How do I make sure that I say the right things? And so there's a whole bunch of noise that comes with that. And the noise of self-doubt then ironically interferes with the part of us that needs to be thinking clearly. And so we get drowned out by that limiting belief stuff. You've touched on a very important one as well, that deflecting attention thing. So in my life, for example, my early woundings as a child, I suffered quite a few humiliations and some pretty harsh bullying. So being the center of attention for me very often can be a highly triggering experience. And there've been times where I've literally I've lost it and gone, just take this spotlight off me, in some shape or form. So even being praised and acknowledged and rewarded and that kind of thing, for me can be very, very difficult. And it's ironic, really, if you think about it, as speakers and presenters and facilitators, that we grappling with that at the same time can often be quite a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite ironic considering what we do for a living. And thank you so much for sharing. In my practice, I find that it's very much the really conscientious people, the top performers, the very talented people who are suffering the most, the people that are absolutely brilliant, the perfectionists, the ones who are putting so much in, who doubt themselves the most. And I think that this is why this conversation matters so much, because the amount of additional stress, anxiety, the things that we're doing to ourselves, it is both invisible and it is exhausting. So the impact to our health, our relationships, our mental state, our lives at the end of the day, but also the impact upon business is something that is critical to speak about. And, I want to share something personal here that is very important. I'm working with people dealing with speech anxiety, as working with presenters. Over the time, I really came to realize that often the cause is not just your standard stage fright, that we were dealing with something that was running much deeper, and that this was filtering into every aspect of life. And there's a Buddhist saying, and the Buddhist saying says that the teacher must teach what the teacher must learn. And I think that often you are put in spaces where you're drawn to people that are actually teachers to you and are mirrors to you. And I realized that what I was seeing was something that I was suffering from myself. And as a business owner, Brenton, and I know that you can probably relate to this, as entrepreneurs, we are in very isolating circumstances where we are often mavericks, where we are innovating, we're creating material, we're doing things that's never been done before, and we don't have that team around us. And I think that anyone who's in a creative space can relate to this, where you are forging ahead, you're on a new path, you're not getting that affirmation, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. So you're entirely dependent upon your own narrative. And if that narrative is unreliable, everything can become a lot harder than it needs to be. So how do we manage that? How do we get up every day without the doubt that, is any of this real? Am I actually any good at what I do? I'm sure that you can relate to this. I mean, there's some days where I actually wonder, do I actually have anything to say? And then, the minute I start to speak to someone, then I realize, I actually can do this. So, Brenton, where do these roots of imposter syndrome actually come from?
Yeah, it's all that stuff that's imprinted on us in our lives that gets us buying into that story that I am what I think you think I am, and we get caught up in that mental masturbation, as I sometimes call it, where we just get so tripped up in the story about what we believe other people believe. And so, we take on early messages and imprints, our woundings, our traumas, etc., as youngsters, and that stuff becomes very, very intrinsically entwined in our coping mechanisms, and ultimately in aspects of our personality. So I shared with you all around some of those early wounding experiences of mine. Another example would be how in grade 5 or 6 or whenever it was at school, standard 4, we called it back in the day, we did IQ tests. And I came out of that labeled as highly gifted and above average IQ. Yeah, blessing, gift, wonderful. But the curse that comes with that is then this narrative that starts arriving from my parents and my teachers going, but you're supposed to be so smart. Why aren't your marks better? Or, you should be able to do anything easily. This should not be difficult for you, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And so I internalized this trap, this question, this harsh impact that why is this so hard for me when apparently it's all supposed to be so easy? Clearly, there's something wrong with me.
Mhm.
And so part of that then imprint is, okay, so now this internalizing dialogue starts to wind its way into huge self-doubt and limiting beliefs. And in today's terms, that shows up often as a sign of fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being judged. In, in the South African context, I often hear um, uh, clients of mine talking about how they're the first generation success story in their family. So they're the first one to be a graduate. So they're the first one with a full-time job. They're the first one that started a business or something along those lines. And how excited they are. But then when they go back to family or their community, instead of being praised and arriving to celebration, they arrive to jealousy. They arrive to some pretty harsh negative messaging of how dare you make the rest of us look bad and things like that, which absolutely blows my mind. But it's a huge imprint. So culture often sets us up for these internal beliefs. And then very simply, like our neurological makeup, you talked a little bit earlier about this. You know, our brain is designed to be highly negativity bias focused. And so our nervous system sees any kind of doubt or any kind of sense of limitation as some kind of external threat. And so then our amygdala starts firing and our limbic system gets stuck in. And then the very part of our brain that we need for critical and advanced thinking, our frontal cortex, shuts down. And then we end up missing the very thing we need to navigate out of these imposter syndrome experiences. And that then dials that up even further in us and starts to reinforce the underlying beliefs themselves. And so we create the self-perpetuating negative loop that grows over the course of our lives.
Absolutely. That narrative that just keeps reinforcing, absolutely. And this concept of trauma, I think is so profound, and the formative years and what we went through in childhood. And IQ tests, I just want to bring in there, I found very traumatic, and I only discovered in the last 2 years that I suffer from dyslexia. So I actually pretty much failed my IQ test, and just the different types of intelligence we have, and how our society is not inclusive enough to recognize us as human beings in this world, and also to recognize, the unique challenges that we as women, as South Africans, as culturally diverse people, who many of us just did not have those access to education and privileges that in this society, and the challenges that people are struggling with, it just humbles me on a daily basis. So I think that this is a very big thing in our culture, where we're not very good at being good to ourselves, and we're very, very hard on ourselves, and it's very much part of the psyche. So the one thing I want to ask you about is what this is actually costing people. And I think in corporates and for our corporate audience, this is having a big impact, and our corporate audience will definitely recognize us if we name it clearly.
Well, one of the big ones is the missed reality. So just very quickly, like you talk about how your IQ test perhaps reveals that maybe you're not as intelligent or whatever, but actually, I ironically think you're one of the most intelligent people that I know. So very often we actually don't realize how the world sees us because we're so caught up in the story, right? But one of the most important costs here is the significant contribution to chronic stress, because we live so often with this hectic anxiety about being found out and being caught short and being humiliated and whatever other stories. We end up carrying huge anxiety, and that has a physical toll long term. So I'd estimate probably 2/3 of the leaders that I support and regularly in coaching conversations with, they're on some kind of medication for anxiety, depression, etc., and are flirting with burnout all the time. And the imposter aspects don't help because they feed that in a big way. Um, at a more practical level, because as a result of that, people hold back often. So talented people don't put their hands up for job opportunities, or they don't speak up in meetings, or They gaslight their visibility effectively. What ends up happening is organizations sit with invisible talent that's there. It's just not known because it's holding itself back. And then the extension of that is career stagnation as an impact. And then, of course, because it's an anxiety-provoking experience for so many people, a lot of people struggle to have this overall sense of joy and gratitude and appreciation for their path and their journey and what they're building for themselves. And these highly successful people who are doing amazing things are sitting with all this horrible doubt.
Yeah.
So anyone who's done any Enneagram work, for example, and is a high 3, will know that like success is fleeting. I'm now chasing the next success, because if I don't, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to sustain it.
Yeah. I really love what you're saying there. It's something I see a lot is, all of this causes us to fail to take up space. And I think this is a very big thing for women as well. Not putting forward our ideas, not using our voices, staying smaller than we need to be. And also failing to embrace the growth mindset because of the fear of not being enough, not being good enough, not the fear of failing. And what does failure actually mean? And as a result, what happens is business loses the full contribution of the most talented people in their midst, because they are waging the silent war inside their own heads. Which brings us to what is it that we can actually do about it? And what would the first thing be that you would say, Brenton, for someone who recognizes themselves in this conversation?
Step one, always acknowledge it within yourself, talk about it with others. So create the opportunity to ask, for example, this is what I believe about myself. How do you see me? Is the story I tell myself true? Create support opportunities. Speak with a trusted resource, a colleague, a friend, a mentor, a coach. Unpack it, explore where it comes from, discuss it. It's probably the most important step of recovering from this thing, is creating the opportunity to healthily talk about it. As coaches, of course, we sit with all sorts of wonderful tools. One of the deeper ones of those that I use quite regularly is to help people to connect with the source. So what's the underlying story that is leading you to have these beliefs? So that's certainly where I would start. Get in touch with it, talk about it.
I really resonate with that. I actually feel that there's a bit of shame attached to this, and shame cannot survive when it is in the light, when you bring it into the light. And the importance of having a witness and feeling that you're not alone. And the minute we start speaking about it, we realize that we are not alone. And it's actually profound. I just want to jump into this technique that or strategy that I found is so profound, is that, I think we walk around in life thinking that everybody's got it together. And that's one of the biggest things to challenge, is that I don't think anybody has actually got it together. So challenging that mindset, and being willing to be open and vulnerable. And when we do that, we actually give others a permission slip to admit that they're also struggling. And then, we bounce off that and we start to support each other. But one of the strategies that I really believe in, and I share quite often in some of my training, is the practice of noticing, which we do when we start to keep a gratitude journal. And it sounds very woo-woo, but this is really rooted in solid psychology, making it a practice of writing down things that you are not only grateful for, but the things that you notice that you have achieved. And it's a discipline, because what happens is you're starting to reframe what it is you're noticing. And we really are hardwired to notice the negatives and filter out the positives. So we're building a forensic record of evidence. And this is really one of the most powerful tools that we can possibly practice and acquire, because we need to ask ourselves the question, what is it that we're noticing. And maybe, Brenton, you can share another tool with everyone.
Oh, gladly. To build on what you're talking to there, there's a wonderful process that revolves around taking charge of the movie of one's life. So when we work with the brain's powerful ability to not actually know the difference between imagination and real, we're able to immerse ourselves mentally into a mental movie of exquisite detail. And so when we find ourselves caught up in the negative version, the horror movie of the imposter and the terror of being found out and all of that stuff, in a safe space, when one's able to create a safe and quiet space where one can really just get in there and imagine, one can completely connect with being the starring actor, actress, but also director at the same time, and go, what's going on here? How am I feeling? Where is this coming from? What's the story that's playing out in my mind? And then the beautiful thing is one can then switch into the new version of that and direct and call action on an imagined alternative. So tapping into the gratitude, tapping into the what am I really good at? How do I want to be feeling? What would it be like to be proud of myself? Really connecting with that emotional experience, and then directing and shining the lights on and calling action on that version and repeating that as often as possible to wire that as a new reality that then can play out the next time you bump into the imposter stuff bubbling up. And people love that when we play that as a game and as a tool.
Absolutely. I really love what you're saying there, just the encouragement for us to be the director of our own movies. And I think, that's really important. This thing that we grapple with, that we struggle with, just reaffirming that it really thrives in isolation. And it depends on you believing that everyone else has it together and that you are the exception. So just going back to the fastest way to dismantle all of this is to try to find other people around you, high performers, people that who are working so hard, doing so much, and are grappling with their own self-doubt, and to start normalizing it, to start acknowledging each other, but most importantly, to acknowledge yourself. Because the one thing that I have learned in life is that external affirmation is never going to do the job. It is literally water off a duck's back. The only affirmation that ever actually sits and will nurture you is your own. I can see that we're starting to get some hands raised and everything, and we are going to open shortly for questions. So if I can ask everyone to please not go anywhere. But what I just want to close with before we wrap up, Brenton, is, do you have a final strategy for us today before we wrap up? And do you believe that we can actually recover?
We absolutely can recover, and we can develop and grow as long as we choose to consciously make it important. And so the final strategy that I would absolutely encourage people to do in building on what we've already spoken about is to invite a circle of trust together, whatever that looks like, and to actually invite and create the conversation. Stop waiting for someone else to do it for you would be a big thing. That's I am what I think you think I am stuff. We have to reverse that by creating opportunity to ask people, how do you see me? And then be willing to receive the feedback and share theirs with them. Create the circle of conversation.
Yeah, I like that. I think, we just go through things alone far too much. And what I would like to leave everyone with is that, the self-doubt, it is not evidence. Emotions are not actually evidence of reality. Often how we feel is not at all evidence of reality. And we have to interrogate how we feel, and we have to interrogate that inner narrative. The people who never question themselves are the ones that are more at risk. So the fact that you're questioning yourself is actually a really good thing, but it has to be mitigated because not managing that amount of doubt is actually the enemy. And, the invitation here is to start managing your inner world with the same rigor and intentionality that you bring to everything else in your life. Imagine how powerful you would be then. And in closing, we just want to thank everyone for spending this time with us. It's really been, I think, a really important conversation. I hope that you've all gotten something from this. From my side, I have to say that this is ongoing work. It's ongoing work for me on a daily basis. It is a struggle. I'm not going to lie. I struggle with this. There are days that I wake up and I wonder, what do I do? And I have to get help and I have to work on myself. And I hope that my experiences, my journey on this is something that can help others. I think Brenton and I, the reason we're here is because this is a lived experience for us. And it is incredibly humbling. It is a pleasure to share this with our community. And Brenton, any final words from your side?
Absolutely. If one embraces this as a journey of discovery and development, one can have a lot of fun rewriting that version of fear as false evidence that appears real into fact-checking the evidence and reassessing and rewriting the story.
Absolutely.
And I love being involved in that work. Thank you very much for this chat today. It's a beautiful way to start Friday.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brenton. So, Brenton, you can reach out to Brenton on flyingmanta.co.za. And I think everybody knows how to reach me.